Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a distinct pleasure and privilege to be speaking with you today. I am, in fact, starting after I was supposed to end, and therefore, if you will pardon the pun, I am quite literally eating into your lunchtime. My task today, in approximately 15 to 20 minutes, is to give you a status update on large-scale emerald and ruby supply from Africa. I'm conscious that we have in the audience today a number of people who are very well familiar with Gemfields and some who are not, and I will try and strike a happy medium between those two audiences. One final thing. If you are not a fan of graphs in presentations, I highly recommend sneaking out the back door now, because there are a number of them. Thank you. Gemfields remains a publicly listed company. We are listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. We are seeking a listing in London, specifically the AIM market, towards the end of this year. Group-wide, our revenues are about $200 million per annum. And the company's market value today is about $160 million. So we are but an ant when compared with Lao Feng Sheng. That $160 million of market value buys you 75% of what is today the world's single largest operating emerald mine, 75% of what has become the world's largest ruby mine, and 100% of Fabergé, which plays a very important role for us in helping the positioning and the perception of colored gemstones in the mind of the consumer. You might see a slightly mysterious blue sapphire down at the bottom with a question mark, and that is because we would very much like to add sapphires to the Gemfields portfolio in order for us to have the big three. But there is a great saying in my native South Africa, which is that you cannot squeeze a fruit to ripeness, and therefore we will wait for the right deposit to come to us. Very importantly, Gemfields is an African-focused company. We have parked our ambitions of trying to get into Colombia, and we've done the same in parking our ambitions of trying to get into Sri Lanka. Our focus for the foreseeable future will be exclusively on Africa, as is portrayed here by some of the characters from our present advertising campaign. Africa, as Tony mentioned, has become the single largest exporting mining operations for both emeralds and rubies in the last decade. And I've been a particular fan of the composition of this slide until such time as one of my children, who in the way that only children can see things that adults can't, said to me, "Dad, why does she have light shining out of her armpit? Is that her superpower?" And so I fear you are probably the last audience that will see this slide in its current format. If we have a quick look at Kagem, this is our emerald mine in northern in northern Zambia. That gives you a rough idea of the scale. That's one of my colleagues in his high-vis jacket. Those white lightning bolts play a very important role in the formation of the emerald crystals. They're called pegmatites. We do a great deal of value addition in country. Gemfields does no cutting and polishing anywhere on the planet. We are purveyors of rough gemstones, but the value addition that we conduct is obviously in cleaning the gemstones very carefully, including with dentistry equipment, and then obviously doing the grading and sorting, where for emeralds, we now have more than 200 grades of emeralds and more than 500 grades of rubies. The first of the graphs. Accountants have a habit of looking at your annual performance only once a year. At Gemfields, we try and look at our annual performance every month. So in many of the graphs you're going to see today, each one of the bars represents what's happened in the preceding 12-month period. And what you're looking at is the total number of carats produced by the Kagem Emerald Mine going all the way back to 2006. Note the volatility with these very big cycles between sort of 20 million carats running up most recently to 35 million carats. However, not all carats are created equal, and we often say to our investors that looking at the total number of carats produced is absolutely pointless. What matters are the very small little red dots that you can hardly see at the top. And the reason for that, if you think about the range of Mercedes-Benz motor cars, from the least expensive Mercedes-Benz to the top of the range Mercedes-Benz, the price might change 10 or 15 times. Not the case with colored gemstones. In fact, if you look only at the Kagem Emerald Mine, our products from the bottom of the range to the top of the range, in the rough form, the price changes 2 million times. And some 70% of our revenue comes from the top 7% of the weight. Now, this picture is even more aggressive when you look at the production from the Montepuez Ruby Mine in Mozambique. There, the price doesn't change 2 million times. It increases, pick a number, 25 million times. When you average that out from the 2 cents per gram to the $40,000 per gram, you get to an average of approximately $17.50 per gram. So if we zoom in on just the premium emeralds, that's the history of production from the Kagem Emerald Mine, and it looks pretty ugly, but the reason for this big drop over here is because back in 2010, we made some significant changes to the grading system, so after that date, things should be fairly consistent, and you can see that we've enjoyed pretty good production of premium emeralds in the last year or two, surpassing 200,000 carats. If we look at the amount of rock that we have to move to get the emeralds out of the ground, you can see that we are presently moving in the region of 12 or 13 million tons of rock a year, so call it 1 million tons per month. And these big swings, as we've scaled up the production that you see here, are what happens in an open cast mine when, as you mine it, the sides of the mining pit become relatively vertical, and you then have to invest a lot of money in pushing back the side walls of the operation. So that's the big increases that you see in total rock handling. The waste that we move is shown here in black. The green stuff is called talc tremolite magnetite schist, which is a fancy name for special waste. And what we're interested in, obviously, is the ore, which is the little red bits at the top. The stripping ratio, a nice mining term, the ratio of waste to ore, for this mine would cause any mining engineer to pass out and fall off their chair. It is approximately 80 or 85 to 1, whereas most mining operations are somewhere between 4 and 10. In order to get an emerald out of the ground, it's a 1 part in 5 million operation. In other words, we have to move 5 million parts of rock to get 1 part of emerald. A nice, easy way to think about that is Thailand's population, I believe, is just a little bit north of 60 million people. So this business is a little bit like filtering through all of the 60+ million people in Thailand and only taking 12 of them, and those are the ones that you are interested in. So the next time you see an emerald, bear in mind how difficult they are to find. The operating costs for the Kagem Emerald Mine, again, are tabulated here all the way back to 2009. In red, you can see the operating costs, and in black, you can see the capital expenditure. So investment in things like infrastructure, buildings, yellow goods, excavators, and trucks. You can also see, quite interestingly, that we've been through a fairly tough time in recent years in emerald mining, and that the capital expenditure collapsed quite a bit, but that as the market has recovered recently, we've put quite a bit of money into new infrastructure and new mining equipment. But you're looking at approximately $50 million a year between OPEX and CAPEX to keep the Kagem Emerald Mine running. Looking at revenue. Again, each one of these bars is the revenue in the preceding 12 months. This looks a lot more digital in its overall profile because we only run 3 or 4 auctions every year. And you can see that the average is approximately 60 million US dollars across the last 10 years. That at one point, primarily because of overlapping auctions, we managed to eke out $102 million. But that again, having been through a fairly tough time in the emerald business, things have definitely improved a little bit, with revenues in the last 12 months sitting at approximately $80 million. Now, as a small reward, collectively for all of us, having been through the first set of graphs, we get some light relief in the form of some crystals that were recently produced at the Kagem Emerald Mine before we switch to Mozambique. These are photographs of the Montepuez Ruby Mine in Cabo Delgado province, way in the north of Mozambique. The mining operation here is very different. The pit depth is only 3 to 12 or 13 meters in depth, whereas the Kagem Emerald Mine today is 132 meters deep, hence its stripping ratio of 80-85 to 1, whereas the stripping ratio of waste to ore here is approximately 4 or 5 to 1. In February of this year, we opened up what we believe to be the world's first ruby processing center. This was an investment of approximately $12 million. All of the ore, after it's gone through a concentrating process, gets jet pumped to the top of that facility and then undergoes a series of processes before the final grading and sorting is conducted on the ground floor. The heart of that facility are these machines, and these machines are effectively sorting machines which rely on the fluorescence under UV light of rubies. And so at the back of this machine, there is a panel of about 360 compressed air jets. And there is a UV light that looks at the falling layer of gravels and rubies. And as the camera eye sits and spots a ruby, it knows exactly which compressed air jet to fire a blast of air. And so all of the rubies go down one channel and all of the waste goes down a different channel. You know you're in a good zone of ore when this machine sounds exactly like a popcorn machine. More than 500 grades now, and when we look at the history of the ruby production, from day one for us, this again is total number of carats. Total number of carats looks absolutely terrible because it looks like we were producing 14 million carats a year and that we've dwindled down now to less than 2 million carats. But I repeat, total carats is really an irrelevant measure. What we should be doing is focusing only on the premium ruby production. And this is one of the key updates for today. We have been struggling, as you can see from this graph, to maintain our premium ruby production levels. We hit a peak of 120,000 carats per annum, and that peak has now been consistently falling to approximately the 70,000 carats per annum, i.e. in the last 12 months. This shows you the grade of premium rubies in the preceding 12-month period, and again, that mimics the same pattern. The point to note is that we are achieving less than 0.1 carats per ton of ore that is currently being fed through the washing plant. Looking at the premium ruby production in a slightly different format, this shows you the premium ruby production cumulatively for each year from January to December in a number of the preceding years. For those who do annual budgeting, the green line is the budget that we set ourselves for premium ruby production for 2019. Our performance to date at the end of August sits down here. So in fact it is, with the exception of 2015, about the worst year that we have had for premium ruby production. Now, nobody can predict what the future is going to bring. Naturally, we hope that this pattern will recover, but at this point in time, our geological understanding is not good enough for us to be able to predict what the future looks like. In terms of total rock handling, the Montepuez Ruby Mine is about half the size of the Kagem Emerald Mine. This moves about 6 million tons of rock every year, and you can see that level is picking up as we try and find more premium rubies. Operating costs, Kagem, you'll remember 50 million for the Emerald Mine, At Montepuez, we're currently sitting, when you combine the operating costs with the capital expenditure costs, at about $55 million. It's fair to say that that graph is heading in only one direction. Looking at the revenues for the Montepuez Ruby mine, again since day one, you can see that in the last couple of years we've managed to achieve just a little bit more than 120,000 carats, 120 million US dollars, and that has recently dropped down to just a little bit north of 100 million as the amount of premium rubies have declined. Those are the ruby graphs concluded, and here's the pleasant picture to alleviate the eyes, and a couple of fine specimens of our secondary rubies, before we look quickly at some of our host country developments. Responsible sourcing, where have our gemstones come from? Many people will have seen this 5,600 Inkalamo emerald, but it was one of the first gemstones in which we worked together with Gubelin on the provenance proof program, whereby it is effectively infused with nanoparticles that travel with the emerald and will do for years and years to come. So the top quality material at our emerald auctions now gets this nano tagging technology, and it means that our customers can clean the gemstones, cut and polish them, mount them in jewelry, and for years to come, Gubelin is able to identify and link those nanoparticles directly to the Kagem Emerald Mine in Zambia. So for the first time, we have the ability to go back to the mine of origin, not just the country of origin. We will also be combining this in November and December with the Gubelin blockchain technology, which gives us about the best solution between the nanoparticle tagging and blockchain that the industry can provide today to get back to the point of origin. If anything spoils lunch, it is this graph. In January of this year, in Zambia, the Zambian government introduced a brand new 15% export duty on emeralds. That export duty applies to rough gems, it applies to cut and polished gemstones. And in addition to the 6% mineral royalty that we already pay, it means that we now have to pay 21% of turnover in taxes before we've paid corporation tax. And you can no longer deduct this 6% from your profits. So in fact, even if you're loss-making, they add the mineral royalty back on top, and you then have to pay corporation tax on that. The message, ladies and gentlemen, is that the tactical advantage for investment in the colored gemstone sector, specifically emeralds, has been handed on a platter to Colombia and Brazil. The 15% export duty might be the negative, but with that comes the good. And as we've heard this morning, we've seen a great increase in the interest from China, specifically in Zambian emeralds, with Chinese customers now attending our emerald auctions, and most recently having been very successful at our last auction. These are the Zambian rough emerald prices that we've achieved since 2009. The left-hand side is actual dollars per carat. The right-hand side is exactly the same graph, but we've simply re-indexed it so that the $4.37 in our first auction becomes $1 here. So the $1 that we received at our first high-quality auction has grown today to $16.43. And again, one can see the dip in prices and then the recent recovery, which we clearly hope will continue. A development in Mozambique. There is a fairly significant artisanal mining operation that has sprung up an area called Nakaka. The Montepuez Ruby mine is situated over here, approximately 200 kilometers west of the town of Pemba. And on these licenses over here, so just to the southeast of Montepuez Ruby mining, Nakaka village is up here, there are today approximately 1,100 artisanal and in fact illegal miners, because those licenses are properly issued to other companies. And the present operation looks a little bit like that. Some of these rubies are being heated locally in country, and therefore anybody who is purchasing these rubies should be very careful about the product that they are purchasing. These are our total contributions in the form of taxation. Green is emerald, red is ruby. The long and the short of it is you can see that the emerald business has battled in the last 2 years with a smaller tax contribution. But whilst tax is often very complicated, it doesn't have to be. The simple question is, how much of your revenue have you paid as tax? That's a universal measure that anybody can understand and should be able to produce. In Zambia, over the last 10 years, we've had $630 million of revenue, and 18% of that has been paid to the Zambian government, so about 112 million US. Mozambique has come online much more quickly, and in the last 5 years, on $521 million of total revenue, we've paid some 23% of revenue to the government in taxes. That's 23% in every dollar of revenue has gone to government, not 23% of profit. Job creation, the Kagem Emerald Mine today has now surpassed 1,000 people, and the Montepuez Ruby Mine, which has obviously come on stream much more quickly, is today employing more than 1,400 people. Prida, this morning you raised an amazing question, which is who does the planet belong to? And there's a lot of discussion about responsible sourcing. And if we take the essence of that phrase, we have to be responsible at the source, and we have to be responsible to the source. And so you asked, who does the planet belong to? And I'm going to extend that question today by saying, who do the gemstones belong to? And perhaps a little controversially, I'm going to say that they don't belong to artisanal miners. I'm also going to say they don't belong to gem fields. Rather, properly licensed miners of any description should be acting as if they have a fiduciary duty towards the real owners of the gemstones, which are the citizens of the host countries. That's what responsible sourcing means. And therefore, this is not, for us, so much a debate about large-scale or artisanal mining, but rather it is a question of how we take a country's natural resources, act as the custodian of those resources, optimize the prices that we can get for those resources, and then make sure that we get the greatest proportion that we can to be repatriated to the host country and to remain in one form or the other in that host country. Now, you get a lot of CEOs who stand up on stage and say nice, charming things, but can they back it up with facts and real figures about whether or not any of this is true? And so we put a challenge to our accounting team, and they produced for us actually a very simple table compared to the very complex financial statements that one typically sees. We've put this together in a beautiful color called accounting gray. And what this is very simply, on the left-hand side, and this is looking only at the Montepuez Ruby Mine, but what is the total amount of money that's flowed into the Montepuez Ruby Mine? And the answer is $674 million, of which 521 came from ruby sales, 121 from bank loans, 32 from shareholders, and $1 million of other, which includes equity investment. And obviously, we need to be able to account for every single one of those $674 million. And that's what's tabulated over here. So these are the uses. We've repaid $119 million of bank loans, by which you can immediately tell we still owe a small amount to the banks of $2 million. The shareholders have been repaid their loans. You've got $208 million have gone into operating costs, 75 in corporation tax, 47 into mineral royalties, $95 million paid to date in dividends to the shareholders of the Montepuez Ruby Mine. And when you tally all of that up, you get to the total of $674 million. Interestingly, government share of revenue is higher than the dividends that have been paid to date from this operation to the shareholders of Montepuez Ruby Mining. It was very interesting to hear the comments made about Sri Lanka, and I would love to see a similar table for the values that have been exported from Sri Lanka during the course of the last 2 or 3 decades. Running out of time, and before I get thrown physically off stage, Tony, I'm on it. Give me 45 seconds. Our marketing communications budget annually is about $13 or $14 million. We recently did an investment report with an outfit called Knight Frank. We set up a walk-in gemstone in the Dubai Mall where people could walk into a hall of mirrors, take their selfies, and just last weekend, in trying to educate retail staff in being more comfortable about emeralds, rubies, and sapphires, we ran an event in London on a Sunday so that we wouldn't interfere with retail operations, and we thought we might get 30 or 40 people, but more than 100 people turned up and gave up their Sundays in order to learn more about emeralds, rubies, and sapphires, drawn from all the major brands that are represented specifically on Bond Street in London. With Knight Frank, we did an interesting little graph, which has never been seen before, but if you put $1 just before the great financial crisis into the S&P, the Dow Jones, the FTSE 100, or you put it into colored gemstones, what would have happened to your money? We're using as a proxy here the index calculated by GemVal, which comprises 26 standard gemstone types in the cut and polished form. What's interesting is in the height of the great financial crisis, your dollar will have fallen to be worth about 50 cents, whereas the GemVal index hardly dipped below sort of 94 or 95 cents. You can see everything recovering, and the gemstones were well ahead of the equity indices all the way through until very strong equity performances in the United States of America have led those two equity indices a little bit higher. One of my colleagues challenged me not to say Brexit today, but the FTSE 100, I think, has suffered as a result of that unmentionable word. Dan Tobin-Smith did an amazing collaboration with us recently as part of the London Design Festival. If you haven't seen the images of the inclusions that he has taken inside of gemstones, they are cosmic in their proportions. Then, nearly there, Tony, nearly there. One member of the audience yesterday evening, Pearl, reminded me of a slide that I used at the last ICA Congress, which said that Gemfields should not be thought of as Darth Vader, but rather that we should be thought of as Luke Skywalker and his cohort. Since we put that slide up at the ICA Congress, we have been accused of profiteering, tax evasion, human rights abuses, and triggering Islamic extremism in the northeast of Cabo Delgado. And here is a selection of the articles that have appeared. What I'd like to say to you, ladies and gentlemen, is that you should rest assured that Gemfields makes every effort to ensure that we run our operations in the most responsible manner that we possibly can. I am here for the balance of the Congress, and I would welcome discussion or indeed questions from anybody who would like more information. And given the level of effort that we put into being transparent, paying our taxes, supporting agriculture, education, healthcare, and livelihoods, we would not undermine the most fundamental pillar on which the last 12 years of what we have built has been founded. I will add in Mozambique, as a quick update, in the northeast, the extremism that we are seeing, that's about 400 kilometers as the crow flies from the Montepuez Ruby mining area. It has not had an impact on our operations to date, but it is clearly gathering pace. We now understand that Russian mercenaries are working together with the Mozambican government to try and address those issues. 3 of those mercenaries, we understand, have been killed in the last 10 days. And of course, on Tuesday, the 15th of October, is the next general election in Mozambique. I would typically spend some time telling you about the community and conservation work that we're doing, the Chapula Secondary School and Kana Health Clinic, computer centers, the tree sapling nurseries that we're running, plus the agricultural work that we're supporting. But It's one thing to see that in slides in Bangkok, Thailand. It's quite another to see them with your own eyes. We host many visitors. Every week we have visitors at both of the mining operations, and if you have the ability to travel to Mozambique and or Zambia, please do come and see how these operations operate for yourselves. Thank you for your time and attention, and Tony for your patience.